The Mafia boss's daughter wouldn't stop crying until the Black Maid song revealed her secret past. Inside the grand mansion of Mafia boss Dominic Romano, the sounds of the night echoed with an unsettling tension. The usual lavish parties had come to a halt as his daughter, Sophia, cried uncontrollably in her room. No one could soothe her. Not the finest doctors, not the expensive toys, and certainly not her father's presence. Dominic stood outside her door, his broad shoulders tense, his jaw clenched as he listened to her cries. His daughter's distress was something he couldn't ignore. The small, delicate girl that once had a bright smile now seemed lost, drowning in her tears. He had no idea how to help her. His empire was built on fear, respect, and power, but in this moment, it felt like none of that mattered. The house was filled with luxury and wealth, but none of it could bring him the peace he so desperately needed. He paced the hallway, feeling more helpless with each passing minute. His daughter's cries seemed to reverberate through the halls, growing louder, more desperate. Finally, he turned to the one person in the house who always seemed to find a way to ease the tension, the maid. Olivia, a quiet and reserved woman, had worked for the Romano family for years. She had always kept to herself, her presence barely noticeable except when it was absolutely needed. Dominic walked to the service stairs and found her there, cleaning the grand chandelier, her gaze focused on the task at hand. "Olivia," he said, his voice laced with frustration. She looked up, her eyes calm and collected as always. "Yes, sir?" she asked, her tone respectful but neutral. "It's Sophia." Dominic's voice cracked slightly. "She won't stop crying, and nothing seems to help. Can you do something?" Olivia paused for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. She had seen the child's pain, but unlike the others, she understood the silent suffering of a broken heart. "I'll try," she said softly. She didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. Olivia knew that sometimes, the simplest act of kindness could heal the deepest wounds. She made her way upstairs to Sophia's room, her steps quiet and deliberate. As she entered the room, she found Sophia curled up in her bed, her face buried in her hands, her body racked with sobs. Olivia didn't say anything at first. She simply sat down beside the bed and began humming a soft, soothing melody, a lullaby that reminded Sophia of the warmth and safety of a mother's embrace. Sophia's sobs didn't stop immediately, but slowly, they began to fade. Olivia continued to hum, her voice gentle and calming. After a few moments, Sophia looked up, her tear-streaked face finding comfort in Olivia's presence. The maid's song, something so simple and pure, seemed to cut through the walls of pain that had surrounded Sophia's heart. And in that quiet moment, the little girl stopped crying. For the first time in days, she felt something other than sorrow. Olivia's song had unlocked a door in Sophia's heart that had been shut tight. She felt safe, understood, and most importantly, she felt loved. Dominic stood outside the door, unsure of what he was witnessing. His daughter, who had been inconsolable, was now peaceful, resting in the arms of a woman he had never truly seen for who she was. He watched as Olivia, with nothing more than a simple song, had managed to do what doctors, therapists, and even he himself could not. He felt a stirring deep within him, a mixture of gratitude and a newfound respect for the woman who had been nothing more than a shadow in his house until now. What had Olivia's song unlocked in Sophia's heart? And what did it mean for Dominic's world, where power and control were everything? The answers were just beginning to unfold. A few moments passed after Olivia's song had brought peace to the crying daughter of Mafia boss Dominic Romano. The soft melody had filled the room with warmth, and the tears that had seemed endless just moments ago were now replaced with a quiet calm. Sophia, the young girl, no longer felt as if the weight of the world rested on her tiny shoulders. Olivia, the maid, continued to hum quietly as Sophia drifted off to sleep, her head resting on the pillow. The simple lullaby, so familiar and comforting, had unlocked something deep inside Sophia, a part of her that had been hidden for far too long. It was not just the song that had worked wonders. It was the act of kindness, the presence of someone who didn't judge, someone who simply cared. Dominic stood frozen in the hallway outside his daughter's room, still stunned by what he had just witnessed. His daughter, the girl who had been sobbing uncontrollably for days, was now asleep, calm and serene, all because of a song. a song sung by someone he had barely noticed in the years she had worked in his mansion. He leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his mind racing. How was it possible? Olivia, the maid, his maid, had done what his wealth, his power, and his connections could not. He had spent countless hours trying to figure out what was wrong with his daughter, but it took one simple act of kindness to change everything. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. For years, Olivia had been in the shadows, performing the menial tasks that kept the mansion running. He had always viewed her as just a maid, nothing more than a tool for the house. But now, watching her soothe his daughter in such a profound way, he couldn't help but wonder if he had been wrong about her all along. As he stood there, lost in thought, Olivia finished humming the lullaby. She gently pulled the blanket up to Sophia's chin and stood to leave the room. Dominic stepped forward, his voice soft but filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Olivia," he called out. Olivia turned around, her expression calm as always, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. She had never expected him to speak to her like this. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly, her voice steady. Dominic paused, searching for the right words. He had always been a man of action, not words, but in that moment, he found himself at a loss. "I don't know what you did, but thank you," he finally said. Olivia nodded, her eyes lowering in respect. "It was nothing, sir," she replied humbly. She just needed someone to listen. Sometimes, that's all anyone needs. Dominic's heart sank as he realized how true those words were. In his world, people feared him. They respected him, but they didn't truly listen. His daughter had been crying for days, and it had taken the simplest act of kindness to bring her peace. He felt a wave of guilt wash over him. Was this what his empire had done to him? Had it made him so cold that he couldn't even recognize when his own daughter needed him? He shook his head, pushing the thoughts away. No, this wasn't the time for self-pity. He had to act. He had to do something to make things right. As Olivia turned to leave, Dominic stopped her again, his tone more urgent now. "Olivia, wait." She turned back, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Yes, sir." Dominic stood tall, his eyes meeting hers for the first time with a genuine look of gratitude. I want to know more about you. You've been with my family for years, but I've never taken the time to really know who you are. What's your story?" Olivia's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard by the question. She wasn't used to being asked about herself. People never seemed interested in the lives of maids, of servants. But Dominic's voice was different. It was filled with curiosity, and for the first time, it seemed like he was actually looking at her as a person, not just an employee. She hesitated, unsure how much she should reveal. But something in Dominic's eyes made her want to open up. "I grew up in a small town," Olivia began softly, her voice carrying a tinge of nostalgia. "My family wasn't wealthy, and we didn't have much. I learned how to work hard from a young age. After losing my parents, I came to the city to find work. I didn't have many options, so I became a maid. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work." Dominic listened intently, his gaze unwavering. He had never known this about her. He had never bothered to ask. As Olivia continued, he felt a shift inside himself, a change that had started the moment he had seen her sing to Sophia. He realized that perhaps he had underestimated not just Olivia, but everyone around him. For so long, he had been surrounded by people who feared him, who did his bidding without question. But here, in this moment, he felt something different. He felt the power of kindness and human connection. And for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be a better person too. After the quiet lullaby that had brought peace to Sophia's restless heart, the mansion was still, almost eerily so. Dominic Romano stood by the doorway to his daughter's room, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and confusion. The woman who had worked for him for years, Olivia the maid, had done what countless therapists and specialists couldn't. She had soothed his daughter's inconsolable crying with nothing but a simple song. As Sophia slept soundly, her once tear-streaked face now peaceful, Dominic couldn't help but wonder about the woman who had made this happen. He had always seen Olivia as just another staff member, another face in the crowd of his opulent, but often cold, world. She was the one who kept everything running, who cleaned, cooked, and made sure the house was in perfect order. But tonight, she had become something more. Someone who had seen his daughter's pain and offered her kindness without question. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had overlooked something significant in her, and for the first time in years, he found himself wanting to understand her better. Dominic had always believed that people existed to serve him or further his goals. That was how the world worked in his universe. Power, respect, and fear had always been his tools. But this simple act of kindness from Olivia made him question everything. He had been blind to the humanity around him. He couldn't remember the last time someone had done something for him without expecting something in return. His life had become a transactional one, where everyone had a purpose and a price. But here was Olivia, doing something purely selfless, something that, for the first time, made him feel something other than anger, control, and fear. He walked down the hall and into his private study, where his thoughts began to churn. His empire had been built on the suffering of others, on the fear he instilled in his enemies, and on the loyalty he had purchased with wealth and threats. Yet, in the quiet of his mansion, in the stillness of Sophia's room, he realized how hollow it all felt. His power had meant nothing in that moment. It had been Olivia's humility, her kindness, that had made the difference. That thought lingered in his mind as he sat down behind his desk, staring at the polished wood surface before him. For the first time, he wondered if it was possible to change, to let go of the ruthlessness that had defined him for so long. But before he could dwell too long on these thoughts, the door to his study creaked open, and there she was again. Olivia. She entered the room quietly, as always, and stood by the door, her expression respectful but reserved. "You wanted to speak to me, sir?" she asked. Dominic looked up at her, a newfound respect in his gaze. "Yes, Olivia. Please, come in." Olivia stepped inside, unsure of what was happening. She had never been invited into Dominic's personal space like this before. The air between them felt different now, charged with an unspoken understanding. "I need to know more about you," Dominic said, his voice softer than she was used to hearing. "You've worked for my family for years, but I don't know anything about you. I want to understand what drove you to act the way you did tonight." Olivia's brow furrowed slightly. She had never expected Dominic to be curious about her life. She had always kept her personal world hidden from the Romanos, knowing that it was not her place to be seen, let alone understood. But his words, his tone, made her feel something she had never felt in this house. Worth. I grew up in a small town," Olivia began, her voice hesitant but steady. "My family didn't have much, but we had enough. We worked hard for everything we had. When I lost my parents, I came to the city looking for work. I didn't have much of a choice. Being a maid wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It was the only thing I could do." Dominic listened carefully, his eyes fixed on her. He hadn't realized how little he knew about her life. For all these years, she had been a silent presence in his house, working, serving, but never truly seen. He felt a deep sense of regret wash over him. How many people like Olivia had he ignored in his life? How many had he used to further his own goals without a second thought? "I'm sorry for your loss," Dominic said softly, his voice filled with a sincerity he rarely allowed himself to show. Olivia nodded, her expression neutral. "Thank you, sir." There was a long pause before Dominic spoke again, his voice more measured. "I want to change, Olivia. I want to be a better man. And I think you can help me do that." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she had heard him correctly. This man, this mafia boss who had ruled with an iron fist, was asking for her help? It was a strange and unfamiliar request, but something in her heart told her that this was the moment that would change everything. "I'm not sure how I can help you, sir," she said quietly, unsure of what to say next. Dominic stood and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. "You've shown me something tonight that no amount of wealth or power can buy," he said, his back to her. "You've shown me that kindness has more power than anything else in this world. And I want to understand that. I want to change for my daughter, for myself, and for everyone I've wronged." Olivia stood there, silent for a moment, taking in his words. She had always known that power could be corrupting, that it could blind people to what truly mattered. But she had never imagined that someone like Dominic Romano would ever admit it. As the minutes ticked by, Olivia felt the weight of his request settle in her heart. This was the beginning of something new, something neither of them had expected. After Dominic's unexpected confession, the room fell silent. He had spoken with sincerity, and in his words, Olivia could hear the raw emotion of someone who had been broken by his own actions. She had never expected the powerful Mafia boss, who had ruled over so many with fear, to seek redemption. She was unsure what to say. This was uncharted territory for her, and for Dominic, she imagined. "I don't know how to help you," Olivia replied softly, standing by the door, her hands clasped together nervously. "I'm just a maid. I've always been just a maid." Dominic turned from the window and faced her, his expression serious but vulnerable. "Olivia, I've spent my entire life believing that power, money, and control were the only things that mattered. I see now how wrong I've been. I want to change. I want to be someone my daughter can look up to, someone who doesn't just wield fear, but offers something more." Olivia could see the weight of his words. He wasn't just asking for a change in behavior. He was asking for a change in his entire outlook on life. His daughter, Sophia, was a mirror of the pain Dominic had buried deep inside him. His cold, unyielding exterior had been forged over years of loss and betrayal. But now, with Olivia's quiet strength and the raw emotion in his daughter's eyes, he wanted to find another way. "I can't promise to change overnight," Dominic continued, his voice shaky. "But I'm willing to try. I need your help." Olivia stood there, unsure how to proceed. She had always kept to herself. Her place in the mansion was as the maid, nothing more. She was here to clean, to serve, and nothing else. But in the silence that hung between them, she realized something. Dominic's request wasn't just about him. It was about his daughter, about giving her a chance to grow up in a world where love and kindness were valued over fear. Olivia finally nodded. "I'll help you," she said quietly. "But you have to be patient with yourself and with Sophia. Change isn't easy, and it's not something that can be forced. It's something you'll have to learn, slowly, with every small step." Dominic nodded, relief flooding his chest. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know where to start, but I'm willing to try." In the days that followed, things began to shift within the walls of the Romano mansion. Dominic began spending more time with his daughter. He didn't know how to reach her at first, but with Olivia's guidance, he started with small gestures, reading to her at night, playing her favorite games, asking her about her day, things he had never thought to do before. For the first time, he felt like a father, not just a figurehead in his daughter's life. Sophia responded to him slowly at first, her trust in him shaky, but over time, she began to open up. She laughed more, her bright eyes began to shine again, and the heaviness that had once surrounded her seemed to lift. Olivia, for her part, quietly observed from the sidelines. She never pushed, never imposed. She simply offered her wisdom when needed and allowed Dominic and Sophia the space to heal. She would hum a soft song to Sophia when the girl seemed restless, reminding her of the comfort of a mother's embrace. But even more than the songs, it was the way she treated them both with patience and kindness that made the difference. Olivia's quiet presence became the steadying force in their lives, the gentle reminder that change was possible, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. Dominic felt something inside him stir every time he saw Sophia smile, every time she reached out to him for a hug. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something right. He realized that his world, the one he had built on power and control, had left him isolated and distant. But now, with the help of a maid he had once barely noticed, he was learning the value of love, of human connection. As the days went by, Dominic and Sophia grew closer. They began spending more time together, talking, laughing, and even sharing quiet moments in each other's company. For the first time, Dominic felt like he was part of his daughter's world, not just a distant figure who controlled it. The change was subtle, but it was real. The mansion, once a cold, imposing structure, now felt more like a home, filled with laughter, love, and the occasional quiet song from Olivia's lips. Yet, despite all the progress, there was still something that weighed heavily on Dominic's heart. He knew that while he had made strides with his daughter, there was more work to be done. His past was never far behind him, and the people he had wronged still lurked in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. But for now, he was focused on the present, on building a better future for his daughter, and on becoming the man he had always longed to be. Olivia's role in this transformation was undeniable, and Dominic knew that without her, none of this would have been possible. She had taught him the power of kindness and patience, lessons he had never truly understood before, and for that, he would be forever grateful. As days turned into weeks, the change in the Romano mansion was undeniable. Dominic Romano, the once feared Mafia boss, had begun a transformation that no one saw coming. He had made peace with his daughter, Sophia, in ways he never thought possible. Their bond was stronger than ever, with moments of laughter filling the spaces that had once been filled with silence and tension. But Dominic knew, deep down, that the path to redemption wasn't just about fixing things with his daughter. He had to face his past, his mistakes, the people he had wronged, and the empire he had built on fear. And now, more than ever, the stakes were higher than they had ever been. Olivia, the quiet maid who had sparked this change, had become an anchor in his life, providing him with the support and guidance he so desperately needed. Yet, she remained humble and quiet, never pushing for more, never asking for anything in return. She simply stood by, offering her wisdom in the most subtle ways. One evening, as Dominic sat in his study, he found himself staring at the dimly lit city below, thinking about the changes he had made, and those he still needed to make. The sound of Sophia's laughter echoed through the halls, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. He had allowed himself to feel something he hadn't in years: peace. He had made progress, but the past was never far behind him. As he turned from the window, Olivia entered the room, holding a tray of tea. She had become a steady presence in his life, one he hadn't known he needed. She set the tray down on the table in front of him, her eyes briefly meeting his, before she stood back and waited. Dominic couldn't help but notice the softness in her eyes, the kindness that had never faltered, even as he wrestled with his own demons. "Olivia," he said, his voice quiet but filled with urgency. "I've been thinking about the things I've done, the choices I've made, the people I've hurt, and I don't know where to begin to make things right." Olivia stayed silent for a moment, considering his words. She had seen the change in him. She had seen the sincerity in his actions, the way he worked to be a better father and a better man. But she also knew that redemption wasn't something that could be granted, it had to be earned. "You've already started, sir," she said softly. "You're changing, and it's not easy, but it's real." Dominic let out a deep sigh, running a hand through his hair. "It feels like it's never enough," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I've hurt so many people, Olivia. I've done things I can't take back, and I don't know if I can ever truly make up for them." Olivia stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to be perfect, Dominic," she said quietly. "No one is. But what matters is that you're trying, that you're choosing to be better every day. That's what counts." Dominic looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers for the first time in a way that felt raw and unguarded. "I don't know what to do next," he whispered. "I'm lost, Olivia. My whole life has been built on this empire of fear. I've used people, manipulated them, controlled them. How do I even begin to fix that?" Olivia gave him a soft smile. "You start by being honest, by facing the people you've hurt, and taking responsibility for your actions. It won't be easy, but it's the only way forward." Dominic nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, he felt like he could walk it. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Olivia simply nodded, stepping back. "You're welcome, sir. But remember, it's not just about fixing the past. It's about building a future that reflects who you truly are now. The future you want for Sophia, for yourself, and for everyone around you." Dominic watched her leave the room, her presence still lingering, even in her absence. He felt a shift within himself, a deep sense of resolve that had been missing for so long. He had begun to understand the true meaning of redemption, and it was clear that the journey had only just begun. The next day, Dominic made a decision. He would begin to reach out to the people he had wronged, the ones who had suffered because of his choices. It wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to make things right. He knew that his empire of fear couldn't last forever. If he wanted a future with Sophia, a future where he could look himself in the mirror and feel proud, he had to change. And so, with Olivia's quiet guidance and the love of his daughter pushing him forward, Dominic took the first step in a journey that would change the course of his life forever. Dominic Romano sat in his study, his hands folded in front of him, a deep sense of resolve settling over him. The decision had been made. He had to face his past, confront the people he had wronged, and make amends for the damage he had caused. He had been a powerful man for so long, and in the process, he had built an empire on fear, manipulation, and control. But the last few weeks had changed him, and now, more than ever, he realized that this empire would be nothing if it didn't have love, respect, and genuine human connection. He stood up and walked to the window, his gaze sweeping over the sprawling city below. The world he had once ruled now seemed so distant, so disconnected from the man he was trying to become. He couldn't undo everything he had done, but he could start by reaching out to the people who mattered most. His first step was to reach out to his old associates, men who had once feared him and who had followed his every command. Some of them were loyal to him out of necessity, others out of fear, but none of them truly cared for him as a person. Dominic knew that he had built walls around himself that had kept him isolated from everyone. He had used his power to keep people at a distance, but now he was ready to tear those walls down. He needed to face the consequences of his actions. The first call he made was to Victor, an old ally from his early days in the business. Victor had been by his side during the rise to power, but over the years, their relationship had soured. Dominic had used Victor as a tool, a pawn in his game, without ever considering the toll it had taken on their friendship. He knew that this would be difficult, but it was the only way to begin making things right. The phone rang, and when Victor's voice came through the line, Dominic felt a knot form in his stomach. "Dominic," Victor said, his tone guarded, as if he had been expecting this call for a long time. "I know why you're calling. I need to speak with you." "Victor," Dominic said, his voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. "I've made a lot of mistakes, and I can't keep running from them." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Victor spoke again, his voice softer now. "I've been waiting for this day, Dominic. I knew it would come. I'll meet you tomorrow. At the old place. You know where." Dominic hung up the phone, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He had taken the first step, but he knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The next day, Dominic drove to the old warehouse where he and Victor had once met in secret, back when the business was thriving and their loyalty to each other had been unquestionable. The building was empty now, the windows boarded up, but the memories of the past flooded back as he stepped inside. Victor was already there, waiting for him. The two men stood in silence for a moment, both feeling the weight of the years that had passed since they had last spoken. Finally, Dominic spoke. "I was wrong, Victor," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I used you, and I took advantage of our friendship. I was too focused on power and control to see how much I hurt you. I'm sorry." Victor didn't say anything for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, offering a hand. "I never expected an apology from you, Dominic. But I've been waiting for this day. We've both made our share of mistakes, but you're right about one thing. We can't keep running from the past." Dominic shook Victor's hand, feeling a sense of closure that he hadn't expected. For the first time in years, he felt like he had done something right. This wasn't the end of his journey, but it was a start, a beginning of something new. As Dominic left the warehouse, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had confronted his past, and while there was still much work to be done, he knew that he was on the right path. He didn't expect forgiveness from everyone he had wronged, but for the first time, he was ready to accept responsibility for his actions and move forward. Later that evening, Dominic sat down with Sophia, his daughter, in the living room. She had been more reserved than usual, still processing the changes in their lives, but she seemed more at ease than before. He smiled at her, his heart swelling with pride. "Sophia," he said softly, "I want you to know that I'm doing everything I can to be a better father, a better man. I've made mistakes, but I'm not going to hide from them anymore. I'm going to make things right, for both of us." Sophia looked up at him, her eyes filled with trust. She didn't say anything at first, but then, slowly, she nodded. "I know, Papa," she said softly. "I know you're trying." The simple words meant more to Dominic than he could have ever imagined. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead was still uncertain, but with Sophia by his side and Olivia's guidance, he knew that redemption was possible. The changes he had made were only the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter filled with love, understanding, and the possibility of a future that didn't revolve around fear and control. Dominic had taken the first step, but the journey toward healing had only just begun. As weeks passed, the changes within the Romano household were becoming more evident. Dominic's transformation was not an overnight shift, but the steps he had taken towards redemption were tangible. His daughter, Sophia, had become more open, more trusting, and while she still had moments of hesitation, she was growing stronger each day. The bond between father and daughter deepened, but Dominic knew the work was far from over. One evening, as Dominic sat at the dinner table with Sophia, he couldn't help but notice the lightness in her eyes. She had come a long way from the broken girl who cried for hours in her room, and he felt a deep sense of pride. But something was still missing. He knew that his journey wasn't just about healing Sophia. He needed to confront his past, to make amends with the people he had wronged and prove that he was truly committed to changing the man he had been. As the days went by, Dominic's resolve grew stronger. He had reached out to some of his old associates, trying to make amends for the things he had done. It wasn't easy, and not everyone was willing to forgive him, but it was the right thing to do. One day, Dominic decided that he was going to face the people he had hurt the most, his own family. He had kept them at a distance for years, consumed by his empire and the power it afforded him. He had used them, manipulated them, and, in doing so, had lost touch with the very people who had once been his closest allies. Dominic picked up the phone, dialing a number he had not called in years. The phone rang a few times before a familiar voice answered. Dominic, the voice said, cool and steady. It was his brother, Matteo, who had long since distanced himself from the Mafia life. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Dominic felt the weight of the years between them. The last time they had spoken, things had ended on bitter terms. He had betrayed Matteo, just as he had betrayed so many others. But now, he was determined to make things right. I know I've made a lot of mistakes, Matteo, Dominic said, his voice soft but steady. And I've hurt you. I'm asking for a chance to make amends, to repair what I've broken. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Dominic could feel the tension in the air. He wasn't sure if his brother would be willing to forgive him, or if their relationship was beyond repair. Finally, Matteo spoke. I never thought I'd hear you say that, he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. But you've got guts, Dominic. I'll meet you, but it won't be easy. You've got a lot to answer for. Dominic nodded, even though his brother couldn't see him. I know. I'm ready. They agreed to meet at an old family restaurant, a place where they had shared many meals in their younger years. It was a small, quiet place, far from the chaos of the Mafia world they had once known. The next evening, Dominic walked into the restaurant, his heart heavy with anticipation. Matteo was already there, sitting at a table in the back, a glass of wine in front of him. The two brothers locked eyes, and for a moment, it felt like time had stood still. So much had changed, yet so much remained the same. Matteo didn't say anything at first. He simply gestured for Dominic to sit down. Dominic took a deep breath and sat across from him. I don't know where to begin, Matteo, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've spent my whole life chasing power, building an empire, and I've lost everything because of it. I lost you, I lost our family, and I lost my soul. I can't change the past, but I can try to make it right. I can try to be the brother I should have been all along. Matteo took a long sip of his wine, studying Dominic in silence. It felt like an eternity before he finally spoke. I don't know if I can forgive you for everything you've done, Matteo said quietly, his voice calm but firm. But I can see that you're trying. I can see that you've changed, and maybe that's enough. You've taken responsibility for your actions, and that's something I never thought I'd hear from you. Dominic's eyes filled with gratitude. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. I know I can't undo the past, Dominic said, but I'm asking for the chance to make things right. I want to rebuild our relationship if you're willing to let me. Matteo studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll give you a chance, Dominic, but you need to prove it. This isn't something that happens overnight. It's going to take time. Dominic nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. As the evening wore on, the two brothers began to talk, really talk, for the first time in years. They spoke of their childhood, of the family they had lost, and of the choices they had made. It was a conversation filled with pain, but also with the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could start to heal. As they parted ways that evening, Dominic felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the end of his journey, but it was a significant step forward. He had faced his past, and while the road ahead was still uncertain, he knew he was on the right path. With Olivia's support, and with the love of his daughter Sophia, Dominic believed that he could rebuild the life he had once lost. Redemption wasn't easy, but it was worth fighting for. Days passed, and Dominic Romano continued his quiet transformation. He had taken the first step in confronting his past, but the journey was far from over. He had mended his relationship with Sophia, and for the first time in years, their house was filled with warmth and laughter. Yet, the weight of his actions still lingered heavily on his heart. There were more people to face, more bridges to rebuild, and more mistakes to own up to. Dominic knew that until he faced the full scope of his past, he couldn't move forward. He wasn't just repairing the relationships he'd fractured, he was reassembling his entire identity. In the mornings, he would take Sophia to the park, just the two of them. They would sit together, watching the other children play, and Dominic would marvel at the innocence and joy in her eyes. It was something he had long forgotten, something he had lost in the pursuit of power. It wasn't always easy for him to embrace this new version of himself, but Sophia's presence, her trust in him, made it worth it. One afternoon, as they walked home from the park, Sophia stopped in her tracks, looking up at him with a serious expression. "Papa," she said quietly, "are you going to keep making changes?" Dominic knelt down to her level, his heart swelling at her question. She was still so young, but already she was asking the hard questions, the questions that many adults would avoid. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm going to keep making changes. For you. For us." Sophia smiled, a gentle but knowing smile, and reached out to take his hand. It was a small gesture, but to Dominic, it meant the world. As they walked back home together, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the second chance he had been given. But he knew that the road ahead was still filled with challenges. He had made significant strides with Sophia, but there were others, people he had wronged, people he had hurt, and people who were still waiting for him to face the consequences of his actions. It was time to take the next step. That evening, after Sophia had gone to bed, Dominic sat in his study, staring out the window at the city below. His phone buzzed on the desk in front of him, and he glanced at it. It was a message from Victor, his old ally, the man he had once called a friend. The message was brief, but it carried weight. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. Don't bring anyone." Dominic's heart sank. He knew that this meeting would not be easy. Victor was one of the few people who truly understood the depths of the world Dominic had created. He had been there from the very beginning, helping to build the empire, helping to carry out the orders, and helping to maintain the control that had once consumed Dominic's life. But now things had changed. Dominic had changed. He took a deep breath, knowing that this meeting would be pivotal in his journey toward redemption. He had already reached out to some of his former associates, but Victor was different. Victor had been his right hand, his confidant. If Dominic could not make peace with Victor, he knew that his transformation would always be incomplete. The next day, Dominic arrived at the old restaurant where he and Victor had met countless times before. The place was quiet now, much like their relationship had become. He saw Victor sitting at a corner table, a drink in front of him, his expression unreadable. Dominic walked over and sat down without saying a word. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick with the weight of years of unspoken words, of betrayals and unhealed wounds. Finally, Victor looked up, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "So, you've changed, huh?" he asked, his voice low but laced with a hint of curiosity. Dominic nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I have," he said quietly, "and I know I can't change the past. But I'm trying. I'm trying to be a better man, a better brother, a better father." Victor's gaze softened, and for the first time, Dominic saw a flicker of something like hope in his eyes. "I never thought I'd hear you say that," Victor said, his voice almost a whisper. "You were always so sure of yourself, so sure that power was everything. But now you're asking for forgiveness. And that means something." Dominic looked down at his hands, feeling the weight of his past pressing on him. "I don't expect forgiveness from everyone I've wronged," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be different, that I can be better." Victor leaned back in his chair, taking a long sip of his drink. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, his voice still steady but with a hint of admiration. "You've lost everything, Dominic. But you've also gained something I didn't think you had in you. You've gained humility, and that's worth more than all the power in the world." Dominic's heart swelled at Victor's words. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something more valuable. It was the acknowledgement that he had changed, that the man sitting across from him was no longer the same man who had built an empire on fear. It was a beginning, the first step in rebuilding the relationships he had broken. "Thank you, Victor," Dominic said, his voice sincere. "I know I have a long way to go, but with you, with Sophia, and with Olivia's guidance, I believe I can make things right." Victor nodded, his expression softened. "I'll be here, Dominic. But you have to prove it. You have to show that you're not just talking. You've got to walk the walk." Dominic nodded, feeling the weight of Victor's words. It wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready. He had taken the first step toward redemption, and now it was time to continue the journey. The road ahead was uncertain, but with each step, he knew he was moving closer to the man he had always wanted to be. After Dominic's meeting with Victor, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. While the road to redemption was long, he knew he was on the right path. The conversation had been tough, but Victor's acknowledgement of Dominic's change had given him the courage to continue facing the people he had hurt. The next step was to make peace with the woman who had been the most affected by his actions, his wife, Isabella. Their marriage had been one of convenience, a partnership built on power and status rather than love. He had treated her like an accessory to his empire, never truly seeing her as a person, never valuing her feelings or her presence. Now, as he tried to rebuild his life, he realized that he had to make things right with her too. It was a Saturday morning when he decided to call Isabella. He had been avoiding it for days, unsure of how she would react to his newfound vulnerability. But deep down, he knew that this was a conversation that had to happen. He needed to confront the damage he had caused, no matter how difficult it would be. The phone rang, and after a few moments, Isabella's voice came through the line, calm and measured. "Dominic," she said, her tone not giving away any emotion. "What is it?" Dominic took a deep breath. "Isabella, I need to talk to you. I know it's been a long time, but I've been doing a lot of thinking, and there are things I need to say." There was a pause on the other end, and Dominic could feel the tension building. Finally, Isabella spoke again. "What do you want, Dominic?" Her voice had lost some of its previous coldness, replaced by something more guarded. "I've been thinking about everything, about our marriage, about everything I've done," Dominic began, trying to find the right words. "I've hurt you, and I've been selfish. I used you as a means to an end, and I never stopped to consider what you needed, what you wanted. I've been so focused on power and control that I lost sight of everything else." There was another long silence. Dominic could almost hear her breathing on the other end of the line. He couldn't read her reaction, and it made him feel more vulnerable than he had ever felt in his life. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he continued, "but I want to make things right, if that's even possible. I've made so many mistakes, and I can't change the past, but I want to start over. I want to be a better person, not just for Sophia, but for you too." Isabella's voice was quiet, but when she spoke, it was clear she had been processing his words. "You're right, Dominic," she said softly. "You've hurt me, and you've hurt so many others along the way. But I've been hurt too. I was never truly seen, never truly loved. I was just a part of your empire, a symbol of power, nothing more." Dominic felt his heart sink. He had never truly understood the depth of her pain. He had never seen her as a person with her own dreams and needs. He had taken her for granted for so long. "I know I can never undo the past," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "But I want to change. I want to make things right, even if it takes time. If you're willing to give me a chance, I'll do whatever it takes." There was a long pause, and Dominic could feel his pulse quicken. Finally, Isabella spoke. "I'm not sure what I want, Dominic," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I've spent years in a marriage that was built on lies and power, and I'm not sure I can trust you again. But I'll be honest, I see something different in you now. I see that you're trying. I don't know where this will go, but I'm willing to see where this new path takes us." Dominic let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Her words weren't a complete forgiveness, but it was a beginning. It was the first step toward healing, and for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. "Thank you, Isabella," he said, his voice soft. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm going to do everything I can to prove that I'm worthy of your trust." After the call ended, Dominic sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had made the first step toward mending his relationship with Isabella, but he knew there was still so much to do. His past was still haunting him, and there were others he needed to face. But for the first time, he didn't feel as if he was walking alone. With Sophia's love, Olivia's guidance, and now the possibility of reconciling with Isabella, Dominic knew he was on a path towards something new. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it. The next day, Dominic stood in front of his mirror, staring at his reflection. For the first time in a long time, he saw someone different, someone who wasn't defined by power or fear, but by the desire to be better. It was a humbling realization, and one that would take him through the rest of his journey. As he walked out of his office, ready to face the world with a renewed sense of purpose, he knew that the man he had once been was fading away. A new Dominic was emerging, one who was willing to face his mistakes and, for the first time in his life, learn what it truly meant to live with honor and integrity. Dominic Romano had never imagined that the road to redemption would be so long. After the phone call with Isabella, things had settled into a tentative peace. He had done what he could, but there were still so many unresolved issues lingering. From his past, he had faced Victor, made progress with Sophia, and even taken the first steps with Isabella. But there was another figure in his life that he knew he needed to confront: himself. He had built an empire on fear, control, and manipulation, and no matter how hard he tried, those old habits couldn't be erased overnight. For years, he had been the man who commanded power and respect, who made decisions that altered the course of other people's lives without a second thought. But now, he was trying to be someone else. A man who took responsibility for his actions, who faced the consequences of his choices, and who sought to make things right. That evening, Dominic stood in front of his bedroom mirror, staring at his reflection. The face staring back at him wasn't the same one he had seen for years. His eyes were no longer cold and calculating, but filled with uncertainty. His once imposing figure seemed smaller now, less confident, as if he were still unsure of the man he was becoming. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he had been avoiding for so long. His old mentor, Aldo. Aldo had been the one who had taught Dominic everything he knew about power. He had been the one to show him how to manipulate people, how to control situations, and how to maintain his grip on the world around him. But Aldo had also been the one to introduce Dominic to a world of corruption and violence, one that Dominic now wanted to leave behind. He had never called Aldo after his decision to change. It had been a long time since they had spoken, but Dominic knew that facing Aldo was the last step in his journey. He had to confront the man who had shaped him into the person he had been, the person he was now trying so hard to leave behind. He dialed the number, his fingers trembling slightly as he held the phone to his ear. After a few rings, the familiar voice came through the line. "Dominic," Aldo said, his voice low and full of authority. "It's been a long time. What do you want?" Dominic took a deep breath. He had been dreading this moment, but now that it was here, he felt a sense of clarity. "I need to talk to you, Aldo," he said, his voice steady but filled with a sense of purpose. "I've made a decision to change. I can't keep living the way I've been living, and I need to face the things I've done in the past, the people I've hurt, and the way I've used others." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Dominic could almost hear Aldo's reaction. He knew that Aldo wasn't used to hearing these kinds of words from him. Finally, Aldo spoke. "Change," he said, the word dripping with skepticism. "You think you can just change after everything you've done? You think you can walk away from this life just because you've had a change of heart?" Dominic's grip tightened on the phone. "I know it's not going to be easy," he said, his voice firm. "But I can't keep living in the shadows of my past. I've hurt too many people, and I can't undo it, but I can try to make it right. Starting with you." There was silence on the other end of the line for a few moments. Dominic could feel his heart pounding in his chest, waiting for Aldo's response. Finally, Aldo spoke again, his voice colder now. "You've always been too soft, Dominic. You've forgotten what makes this world work. You think you can just leave it all behind and walk away? There's no going back. Once you're in this life, you're in it for good." Dominic's chest tightened. He had known Aldo would react this way, but hearing it out loud still stung. "Maybe you're right," Dominic said, his voice quiet but resolute. "But I'm not the same person I was, and I don't want to live in this world anymore. I'm done with it. I'm done with the lies, the violence, the manipulation. I'm done with all of it." Aldo was silent for a moment before he finally spoke, his voice filled with disdain. You'll never escape this life, Dominic. You can't just walk away from who you are. Dominic's throat tightened as he listened to Aldo's words. He had always been afraid of what Aldo would think, but now he realized that it didn't matter. He wasn't living for Aldo anymore. He was living for himself, for Sophia, for the people he had hurt. I'm not asking for your approval, Aldo, Dominic said, his voice firm. I'm asking for a chance to move forward, to rebuild my life. I don't expect you to understand, but I'm done with this world. And I don't need your permission. He hung up the phone, feeling a sense of finality settle over him. For the first time in years, he had spoken his truth to the person who had shaped him into the man he was, and he had walked away without regret. Dominic took a deep breath and walked out of his study, heading toward the living room where Sophia was sitting, reading a book. She looked up at him as he entered, and for the first time, he felt truly at peace. He had faced his past, and now, with Sophia by his side, he could finally look forward to the future. He had made the decision to change, and he was ready to begin that journey, one step at a time. It had been a week since Dominic had made his decision to change, and the weight of his actions was still fresh on his mind. He had spoken to Victor, mended his relationship with Sophia, and even had an honest conversation with Isabella. But he knew that there was still more work to do. His past had shaped him into the man he had been, and undoing years of mistakes was not something that could happen overnight. Yet, as he stood in front of the mirror that morning, Dominic could feel a subtle shift within himself. He was no longer the man who wielded power with an iron fist. He was a man who was learning to listen, to feel, and to act with intention. It was a humbling experience, and one that filled him with a strange sense of peace. As he left his bedroom and walked down the hall to the living room, he noticed Sophia sitting on the couch, a book in her hands. Her presence was a constant reminder of what he was fighting for. He walked over to her, taking a seat beside her on the couch. Sophia looked up at him, her face softening as she saw the change in his demeanor. "Papa," she said quietly, "are you okay?" Dominic smiled gently, his heart swelling with love for her. "I'm more than okay, sweetheart," he replied, his voice filled with warmth. "I'm learning to be a better man, and I promise you, I'm going to be the father you deserve." Sophia nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. She didn't fully grasp the complexities of the journey her father was on, but she could see the change in him. The way he spoke to her, the way he held her hand, it was different now, more genuine. And for the first time in her life, she felt safe. Dominic leaned in and kissed her forehead. "I know things haven't been easy, but I'm going to make it right. I'm going to spend more time with you, no more distractions. I'm here, and I'm all yours." Sophia smiled, her little heart swelling with hope. For the first time in a long time, she felt the warmth of her father's love, untainted by the coldness that had once been there. After spending some time with Sophia, Dominic knew it was time to take the next step in his journey. He couldn't avoid his past forever. It was time to face the people who had been closest to him, the ones he had hurt the most, and seek the forgiveness that he knew he needed. The first person on his list was Aldo. Their relationship had been one of mutual respect and power, but it had been built on manipulation, on using each other to climb higher. Dominic knew that if he truly wanted to change, he had to reconcile with the man who had helped shape him into who he had been. It was early in the afternoon when Dominic walked into Aldo's office. The office was small, tucked away in a nondescript building in the city. Aldo sat behind his desk, his sharp eyes studying Dominic as he entered. There was no warmth in Aldo's gaze, no welcoming smile. Just the same calculating look that Dominic had always remembered. "Dominic," Aldo said, his voice low. "I didn't expect to see you here." Dominic took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling in. He had spent years avoiding this confrontation, but now, it was necessary. He couldn't move forward without facing the man who had once been his mentor. "I know you didn't," Dominic said, his voice steady. "But I needed to come. I need to make things right, Aldo. I've spent my life hurting people, using them, and I can't keep living like that. I've made mistakes, and I need to own up to them. I need your forgiveness, and I need you to know that I'm not the same person I was." Aldo leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He studied Dominic for a long moment, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You think you can just walk away from everything we built?" he asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "You think you can just change like that?" Dominic nodded, his eyes unwavering. I know I can't erase what I've done, he said, his voice full of remorse. But I'm trying. I'm trying to be better, Aldo. For Sophia. For myself. And for all the people I've wronged. Aldo's gaze softened slightly, though his face remained stern. You've always been a man of action, Dominic. You never asked for forgiveness before, never needed it. This is different, though, isn't it? Dominic swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his past in Aldo's words. It is different, he said quietly. I'm not the man I was, Aldo. And I know it's going to take time for you to believe that. But I'm asking for that chance. There was another long silence between them before Aldo spoke again, this time with a hint of respect in his voice. I never thought I'd hear you say that. But maybe I was wrong about you. Maybe there's something left in you worth saving. I can't give you my full forgiveness, Dominic, but I'll give you the chance to prove yourself. Dominic felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. It was the first step toward making things right with the man who had been a father figure to him. Thank you, Dominic said, his voice sincere. I'll prove to you that I'm different. I'll prove it with every action, every step I take. As he left Aldo's office, Dominic felt lighter than he had in years. It wasn't the end of his journey, but it was a crucial step toward healing. And as he walked back to his car, he knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But with each conversation, each confrontation, he was moving closer to the man he had always hoped to become. It had been weeks since Dominic had taken the first steps to change, but even as he made progress, he knew that the most difficult part of his journey still lay ahead. Facing his past, particularly the people he had wronged, was one thing. But rebuilding the life he had so callously destroyed was something entirely different. The road was long, and every day presented new challenges. But Dominic was no longer the man he had once been. The man who had ruled with fear and control, the man who used others to get ahead, was slowly fading away. With each passing day, he felt more like the man he had always wanted to be, the man Sophia deserved, the man who could look in the mirror without shame. One evening, after a long day of meetings and calls, Dominic sat in his study, his mind drifting to the next phase of his life. He had already made peace with his past in many ways, but now he had to think about the future. He had rebuilt relationships with those closest to him, but he had also alienated many others, people who had once trusted him, people he had hurt along the way. The thought of facing them, of trying to gain their trust again, filled him with dread. But he knew it was necessary. He could no longer live in the shadows of his old life. The phone on his desk buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up to see a message from Isabella. "Can we talk?" it read. Dominic felt a pang in his chest. He hadn't spoken to Isabella in a few days. After their last conversation, things had settled into an uneasy truce. He knew that their relationship was far from healed, but he had hoped that the changes he was making would help bridge the gap. He quickly typed a response. Of course. When and where? Isabella replied almost immediately. Meet me at the cafe on Main Street, 7 p.m. Dominic put the phone down, his mind racing. He had hoped that things would improve with Isabella, but he had never imagined it would be so difficult. He knew he had hurt her deeply, and while he was doing his best to change, he wasn't sure if she would ever forgive him. Still, he had to try. At 7 p.m., Dominic arrived at the cafe, a small, quiet place they had frequented early in their relationship. He entered the door, and his eyes immediately found Isabella sitting in a corner booth, looking down at her coffee. Her posture was stiff, her expression unreadable. Dominic walked over and sat down across from her, unsure of what to say. There was a long pause before Isabella looked up at him, her eyes full of emotions he couldn't quite place. I've been thinking, she began, her voice soft but steady. About everything. About what you said before. About all the changes you've made. And I'm not sure I know what to believe anymore. Dominic nodded, his heart heavy. He had known this would be difficult. I understand, he said quietly. I've spent so many years hurting you, lying to you, and using you. I don't expect you to just forgive me. But I need you to know that I'm trying. I want to be the man you deserve, Isabella. I want to be the man I should have been all along. Isabella looked down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. For a moment, Dominic feared she wouldn't say anything else. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you really think you can change, Dominic? After everything you've done, can you really become someone else? Dominic felt his chest tighten. I don't think I can undo the past. I don't think I can take back the hurt I caused you. But I do believe I can change. I'm already changing. It's not easy, and I know it's not going to happen overnight. But I'm committed to it. For you. For Sophia. For myself. There was another long silence. Isabella didn't look at him, but her fingers had stopped moving on the cup. She seemed lost in thought. Finally, she met his gaze again, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. I don't know if I can forgive you, Dominic, she said quietly. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were. But I'm willing to try. I want to see the change in you. I want to believe that it's real. Dominic's heart lifted slightly at her words. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a chance. A chance for him to prove himself. Thank you, he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. I'll do whatever it takes to show you that I'm serious. I'll prove it with every action, every day. I know it's going to take time, but I'm ready. Isabella nodded, her gaze softening just a fraction. I don't expect everything to be perfect. I don't even expect things to go back to the way they were, she said, her voice steady. But if we're going to move forward, you need to keep showing me that you're different. You can't just talk about it. You have to live it. Dominic nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I will. I promise. As they sat together in the cafe, the tension between them seemed to ease, if only slightly. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a beginning. For the first time in a long time, Dominic felt like he was truly on the right path. He still had a long way to go, but he was no longer the man who had made his world a prison of control and fear. With Sophia's love, Olivia's guidance, and now the tentative possibility of rebuilding his relationship with Isabella, Dominic knew that change was not just possible, it was happening. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving towards something real. Over the next few months, Dominic Romano continued his slow but steady transformation. The man he had once been, the ruthless, powerful mafia boss who feared no one, was fading into the past. Instead, he was becoming someone new. He wasn't perfect, and he knew he never would be. But every day, he took steps forward, trying to be better, trying to be the man his daughter, Sophia, needed, and the husband Isabella deserved. His relationship with Sophia was stronger than ever. She trusted him now, and their bond deepened every day. They spent afternoons together, just the two of them, in the park or at home. Sophia had her father's attention, his love, and for the first time, Dominic could give her the father she had always wanted. She had witnessed his transformation firsthand, and now, she saw him for who he was becoming, not the man he had been. Isabella had become more open, too. Though their relationship wasn't where it once was, there was a new respect between them. They had their moments of uncertainty, of pain, but there was also healing. They communicated more openly, and slowly, a new understanding began to form. Isabella wasn't sure if she would ever fully forgive him, but she saw the change in him, and that meant something. One day, after dropping Sophia off at school, Dominic sat in his car, looking out over the city. He had reached a place where the weight of his past no longer felt like a constant burden. He was no longer controlled by fear, but by the desire to do right. He knew there would always be shadows in his life, remnants of the man he used to be. But the future, his future, felt possible. As he turned the car's engine off, he received a message from Olivia. Can we meet? It read. Dominic felt a wave of gratitude flood over him. Olivia had been there from the beginning, her quiet strength the foundation upon which he had begun to rebuild his life. Without her guidance, without her song that night, none of this would have been possible. He quickly typed a response. Of course. Where? Olivia's reply was simple. I'll meet you at the park, by the fountain, in 30 minutes. Dominic smiled to himself as he drove toward the park. Olivia was the one person who had never judged him, the one person who had simply been there, offering a steady presence when he needed it most. He arrived at the park and saw Olivia waiting by the fountain, her back to him as she looked out over the water. He walked up quietly, and she turned to greet him with a small smile. Hello, Dominic, she said, her voice as calm as ever. I was hoping we could talk. Dominic nodded, feeling the weight of her presence. I owe you everything, Olivia, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You've been the one constant in my life, the one person who never gave up on me. I don't think I could have done this without you. Olivia's eyes softened, and she took a step closer to him. You've done all the work, Dominic, she said gently. I've only shown you the way. You're the one who chose to change. I'm proud of you. Dominic felt his throat tighten at her words. You don't know what that means to me, he said, his voice raw. I don't think I could ever repay you for everything you've done. You've been my guide, my anchor. And now, I feel like I can finally breathe again. Olivia smiled softly, her gaze steady. You've already done the hardest part. You've acknowledged your past, and you've made the decision to move forward. That's something not everyone can do. It's a new chapter for you, Dominic. A fresh start. As the two of them stood there by the fountain, a sense of peace settled over Dominic. He wasn't the same man who had once walked through the world with arrogance and pride. He was someone new, a man who had faced his demons and was learning to live with honor and integrity. His journey wasn't over, but he knew it was headed in the right direction. The healing had begun, not just for him, but for everyone he had wronged. He looked at Olivia, his heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, Olivia, he said quietly. I don't think I'll ever be able to truly repay you, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you've helped me become. Olivia smiled once more, her expression warm and content. You don't need to repay me, Dominic. All I wanted was for you to see what you were capable of. You've done that, and more. As Dominic left the park that day, he felt lighter than he had in years. There would still be challenges ahead. Of course, life would never be without its difficulties. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was walking with purpose. He had faced his past, reconciled with those he loved, and now, he was ready to embrace the future. It wouldn't be easy, but he knew he could face whatever came next. And as he looked ahead, Dominic smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter full of redemption, love, and the possibility of a better tomorrow.